this schedule really shapes up for a playoff run with a 12-team playoff.
Areas that, you need to get from experience, which is just, hey, I need to make quicker decisions.
How do you define success for this team?
National championship.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast. This is the summer school edition. We're talking Missouri. Where do I head? To Power Mizzou. That's Gabe. Gabe, what's going on, man?
Not much, but first time I've gotten to do this. I've heard about it before, but never gotten to do it before.
It's always a blast, and I feel like if you are watching a college football team-specific podcast episode in May or June, you're kind of a sicko like us, and you really love this sport. And I think we got obviously all the Missouri fans who are going to come watch and listen. Obviously, subscribe on YouTube, but also everybody else who wants to learn about maybe their conference opponent or maybe a non-con game. There's some Kansas fans who consume the podcast for sure as well. And Missouri fans would kind of boo hiss them, right?
Yeah, a lot of people looking forward to that one.
All right, so Missouri last year, another double-digit win season, which is awesome. What is kind of the vibe right there in Columbia?
It's interesting. Like, Missouri is not a place where you go 10-3 and there's kind of this feeling of, feels like maybe there was some stuff left on the table, but that was the feeling coming out of last year. I mean, you looked at the schedule, you looked at everything they brought back, and I thought it was a good season, but there was probably more they could have gotten out of it. And it's interesting. For a couple years, we've looked at this year as like, hey, this might be a rebuild. Brady Cook's gone, Luther Burden's gone, Theo Weiss is gone. All these guys are leaving. This might be the year you step back to, 7-5 would be okay. They went out and hammered the transfer portal, and in no way are they approaching this year like that's their plan. I think I get the feeling around Columbia, like Eli Drinkwitz is openly talking about, we're trying to do things that have never been done here.
Which would be like make the playoff.
Which would be his first one was a third straight 10-win season. And then he said SEC championship and make a college football playoff. Drink, he is not afraid to say things out loud that set him up. He's been on national radio and stuff saying he thinks this is his most talented roster ever. And I've always said, even if you believe it, like, don't say it. Convince people that you're awful all summer long. And then if you're actually decent, it's a nice surprise. But if you set people up for this is our best team ever, like even 9-4 kind of seems disappointing at that point.
I'm biased. I like Drink. I know the guy a little bit. I met him at Lehigh High School. I remember we were watching, who was that safety who was like crazy raw, but crazy athletic, who went to Illinois. He got picked, Jarquez Martin maybe. But Drink was there watching him. And I remember we were talking about a sophomore named Devin Leary, who ended up being, pretty good when Drink was at NC State. And he was like, hey, shh. I was like, dude, it's not going to stay quiet. You guys got to fight to keep that one. So.
Right. And then, there were a lot of Missouri fans that when he went in the portal said, oh, well, Drink recruited him, and obviously didn't end up coming here.
All right. So let's talk offense here. Kirby Moore last year, first year as the play caller, correct? With the turnover at quarterback and running back and receiver, how much change do you see in his offense this year?
Yeah, it was, last year was actually year 2 for Kirby. And year 1, everybody was pretty excited, and obviously they have the 11-win season, and Luther has 1,200 yards and all that. Cody Schrader does his thing. And then last year, the offense clearly took a step back. Now, whether that is Brady Cook being beat up and not having as good a year, whether it was the offensive line, some people put that on Kirby's plate. I think it probably hurt a little bit to lose Cody Schrader, who set SEC records, and replace him with guys that didn't. The offense didn't change a ton. It looked fairly similar. I think the optimistic people are going, okay, we had Luther Burden, but like there was so much gravity and so much focus on him that maybe without him, like it opens up and we don't have one Luther Burden, but we have like 6 Theo Weiss or Nate Noel types, right? And that's the hope. I don't know if that's necessarily fair. We talked on our show that I don't think Missouri's problem was trying too hard to get it to Luther Burden last year. I think it was probably not getting it to him enough. I think if you give any offensive coordinator a 5-star player who was probably went too low at number 39 in the draft, he'll take his chances. But it's going to be a little bit more by committee type thing this year than it probably has been the last couple seasons.
If they have a guy who just takes the vast majority of the target share at receiver, who is that guy?
I think it's probably got to be Kevin Coleman from Mississippi State. He had a 1,000 yards last year. I forget if he was second or third team SEC, but he should have been higher. It was funny, like Missouri fans are used to this going against him. Luther Burden got that spot because of Luther Burden's reputation, even though Kevin Coleman had a much better season. St. Louis kid, wears the same number, gonna step into basically the same role. So I think he's that guy. They've got some other guys. I mean, they're really excited about Josh Manning. Marquise Johnson has shown some flashes his first 2 years. So they've got kind of a lot of 2 through 5, 2 through 6 guys. But I think Kevin Coleman's pretty clearly number one.
The guy throwing the ball, obviously, Beau Pribula.
Pribula.
Yeah. Okay. Had a pretty nice little thing going at Penn State, backing up Drew Aller, who's not a bad quarterback. And then I know he's been mocked in some of these recent mock drafts, come out as a top 5 pick for 2026. They used him. I don't want to call it wildcat, but it was similar like what Texas did with Arch Manning, right? He would spell Drew. He'd come in, he'd run. They'd run some play action stuff off the QB run concepts. How much of that do you think ports over to what Missouri's going to do this year?
See, I think that's the biggest thing. Missouri's offense, when it was good the last couple of years, was when Brady Cook used his legs well, right? And that wasn't always designed runs. That was scrambles and everything. It suffered, I thought, when Brady wasn't as much of a threat in the run game. Clearly, that is, I don't want to say Beau's strength, because I don't know that we've seen him throw enough to say he's not a passing quarterback. But it's just what we know he can do. The interesting part, I think, at quarterback is they bring in Beau, and I think he's going to be the starting quarterback. All odds say that. I mean, we can talk about this out loud now. You don't pay a guy 7 figures to come be a backup, but they do have Sam Horn, who, came in with all this hype 3-4 years ago and has never seen the field. He's battled injury, all that stuff. He's gotten really strong reviews out of spring football. Eli isn't going to name a starting quarterback at least until August. They are at least going to go with the, presumption that Sam Horn has a chance to compete for this job. I think it's Pribula's to lose, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I do like that Beau gives you kind of that dual threat. I mean, we use that. And I don't know an offense in the country that is winning mostly with a statue at quarterback anymore. I mean, they can all move.
Running back wise, who are we looking at this year as far as being like the guy, if there is a the guy?
Yeah, it's Ahmad Hardy from Louisiana Monroe. Had as many carries as almost anybody in the country last year. He had, I believe, more yards after contact last year than any Missouri running back had yards, period. So he's going to be the workhorse. Got Jamal Roberts back, who was their third down back last year, probably the same. And we haven't really talked about any true freshmen yet, but they got a kid named Marquise Davis, who was committed to Kentucky. He's a Cleveland kid. And if you look at Marquise Davis, just look up video or a picture of him. He looks like he's 28 years old right now. He is going to play as a true freshman and I think probably be their number 2 back.
Offensive line, like they lose another guy to the NFL. That's 2 years in a row that they've produced a top NFL pick. Do you have like hopes for this unit, concerns? What's kind of the outlook there?
So it is so interesting. I mean, they've got plenty of guys with experience, and they brought in at least 3, maybe even 4 transfers. But Connor Tollison at center is coming off a torn ACL in, I believe it was the Arkansas game toward the end of the year. So I think he'll be ready for the start of the year, but he didn't go through spring football, won't maybe do a ton in fall camp. Caden Green, who came here from OU, he moved into left guard, and all of us just kind of assumed at some point this kid is moving to tackle. That hasn't happened and doesn't really appear to be happening. So they've got to replace not only Armand Membu, who went obviously number 7, but Marcus Bryant, left tackle, was drafted in the 7th round. Cameron Johnson was the second team all SEC right guard. So they've got a lot of pieces to replace. And it's absolutely the question mark on this team is who plays where and how good is the line. I think that's what determines their ceiling.
Schedule wise, that could be rather interesting. I mean, they face Bama's got some dudes up front. South Carolina, we know does. Auburn, I think, does. A&M lost quite a bit, actually, but they probably won't be terrible up front. Arkansas, not so much. Mississippi State, not so much. Oklahoma, probably very good interior with Jackson and Stone, but maybe not quite as good on the edges. So we haven't done the Oklahoma episode yet. But there are quite a few games where they'll be able to ease into it a little bit, at least in the first couple games. So
yeah, it's interesting. Last year around this time of year, Missouri fans got so mad and frankly offended at all the. Well, yeah, I think Missouri could be a playoff team, but I only think Missouri could be a playoff team because the schedule's awful, right? And then kind of late in the year, you got to the point where you go, oh, that actually kind of made some sense. When you saw the way the year unfolded, you go, yeah, this is a 9-win team, but it's probably not a playoff team. And so maybe the reason we talked about that was that schedule. And this year, I mean, look, it's the same teams, but it's full of, I'm not sure what Alabama is. Right? Is this the year Auburn takes the step? I don't know. South Carolina took the step last year, but do they maintain it? A&M, I'm sure that people are going to pick them to win the national title because they do every year. And then I'm sure they're not going to do it because they don't every year. But they've got a whole lot of games on their schedule where you look and say, hey, this team, they could make a jump. And like OU should be better than it was last year, right? But how much better? So I don't think Missouri has a single game on its schedule that you look at and say, there's no way they can win that. But they've also got about 7 of them that you look at and say they could lose.
Makes sense. All right, let's hit a break here. Come back. We'll talk a little defense on the other side.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
Hey guys, welcome back to Summer School. We're doing Missouri today. That's my man Gabe, Power of Mizzou. You guys know him, best Missouri site in the world, like just the expert. So very glad to have him back here on Cover 3. Let's talk a little defense, Gabe. So Corey Batoon, his defense last year took over from the coordinator who departed for LSU. And you know what? It was still really salty. How do you see that changing? Well, hopefully not the saltiness level, but how do you see how they have to play, maybe who's playing? What are the key differences between this year's defense and last year's defense?
Well, they think they've got a front seven that can stack up with anybody in this league, which means you can stack up with anybody in the country. They went out in the transfer portal and just hammered defensive end. I mean, Williams Nwaneri and Jalen Brown were redshirt freshmen that left, but they go out, they get Damon Wilson from Georgia. They get Nate Johnson from App State, Darius Smith from Georgia, who a year ago was getting rave reviews in fall camp and then tore his ACL. So he's basically like a new player there. Johnny Walker leaves, but like they think they should be better on the edge. They went out and they got a couple of linebackers in the transfer portal and then used that Diego Pavia ruling to get Tristan Newsom back for another year. So it was interesting. They go out and get Mekhi Byer from Nebraska, who's in the portal. He was Nebraska's leading tackler last year, and he goes through spring football, and Tristan Newsom's back, and Nick Rodriguez has what Drinkwitz called the best spring on the team, and Jeremiah Trotter's here, and Khalil Jacobs back from injury. So Byer hits the portal, goes to North Carolina State after his 4 months on campus, which, is an era that I'm sure we'll write books about down the road. But they love the front seven. I mean, Drinkwitz called after spring football. He said, I've got a defensive end room that I'm just going to say it, I think is among the best in the country. And I'll let Corey Batoon and Brian Early deal with the fallout from saying that.
With both offensive tackles off to the NFL, I assume spring was rough at times for that rebuilding offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, we could have told you probably more so 8 years ago if that was true. We don't get to see them actually face each other in spring football here. So,
but how do they stretch?
And yeah, they look fine getting off the bus, but look, I'm 5'8", 170. They all look really athletic to me, right? So that's the hard part about. But yeah, going up against Damon Wilson and Darius Smith and Zion Young every day, I would assume that there were certainly some growing pains for that Missouri offensive line, especially lacking a starter at center.
Obviously, you have a lot of sources within the program, even with practice access, more limited than it used to be. Is there a transfer portal guy that they just absolutely rave about? Like hey, we hit on him. It's awesome. We're super happy we paid for him.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've heard all the right things about Damon Wilson. Now that's not going out on a limb, right? I think we had him ranked as the number 2 transfer in the country. So they really like him and they like what they did at safety. They brought in three different guys, and Jalen Catalon, and I think unofficially his 14th year of college football on his 5th SEC team or something like that. He has one more year at Missouri, and I think they really expect him to kind of be that, quarterback back there that kind of gets everybody in the right place and delivers some highlight reel hits for this team.
Back end wise, you mentioned Catalan. Is there anybody else we need to be looking out for who's really potentially special?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the focus, like Missouri fans went into the spring portal thinking they need to go get a cornerback, and they haven't. And I don't think that they'll end up with one. They've got a lot of guys back from last year. They are decent, not great, but I think the approach here is, hey, we're not asking these guys to cover for 6 seconds. Like, we have this front seven that we think is going to make it a nightmare on other teams. We're asking you to cover for 3 or 4 seconds. And like I said, they got Catalan, Santana Banner from Northern Illinois, Mose Phillips from Virginia Tech, and then they bring back Marvin Burks at safety. So some combination of those 4 guys are going to kind of man those back 2 spots. And if there's a weakness on this defense, I think it's probably corner, but like, you're bringing back both starters from last year and 3 of your top 4. So I don't know how weak it is.
Also, I mean, to be frank here, look at this schedule. Whose team's receivers scare you? Bama, I'll give you. I think Auburn with Coleman and the fact they got Singleton from Georgia Tech, like that's definitely a back-to-back week test for those corners in October. A&M lost their leading receiver to Georgia. Noah Thomas is gone. Oklahoma, they're already battling a lot of injury stuff. Like, maybe Burks will be awesome and will actually play in November this year. But I mean, Gabe, just looking at this, eyeballing it, there's some teams that you don't hate playing if corner's your weakness.
Yes, I hesitate to go too far down that road because last year I just kept looking at it and I said, guys, I'm not sure how good this defense has to be. Like, they don't play a good offensive football team all year. And then Connor Wigman looked like Tom Brady against them. And going into the South Carolina game, we said, well, yeah, they're going to run the ball. And Lenora Sellers just threw the ball all over the football field on him. So I guess I hesitate to say, yeah, I don't think the passing games worry you too much just because they were burned by 2 teams that I didn't think could do it last year.
That's fair. All right. So Eli has already kind of gone out and set some expectations. What are your expectations for this team? More appropriately, how would you define success for Missouri in 2025?
I think they're at the point. I think this year really determines if they're at this point, but I think they are, and I think they should be. That Gary Pinkel had this program a few years ago where you go, I kind of start the year thinking they should win 8, right? And if 8's kind of you didn't quite make it, but you're 8-4 and you're playing in the Gator Bowl, the Music City Bowl, whatever, that's fine. And every now and then you might step a little below that, but you look at their schedule and I really think anything less than 9 would be, frankly, a little bit disappointing to Missouri fans and to the people inside the program. I'm not going to predict that this is a playoff team because the questions are left tackle and quarterback, and those are 2 major questions. But I do think there are people in the building that think this team absolutely has that capability.
Awesome. Gabe, enjoyed this. Well, can't say as always. Enjoyed this for the first time, and it's been so much fun.
All right. Appreciate you, bud. Thanks, man.
Take care.